Hello everyone and welcome to the tutorial for the ombre shawl as in our July box. So for this tutorial, let's get straight to it. You will need 6 balls of yarn. You'll need 3 colours, 2 balls of each colour. You'll need a crochet hook. You'll need the pattern and possibly maybe your jelly babies to keep you going. So let's get started. So before we start, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. Firstly, chain 1 stitches are counted as a stitch. So the chain 1 stitch is 1 stitch. So at the end of the row, if it says 10 stitches, then there's 2 chain 1 spaces at either end. And there's a chain 2 space at the center of the shawl. So your first line will say 10. That's what it includes. The other thing I just wanted to point out was when you're preparing your yarn, it's a really super good idea to just do what I call prep the yarn. So I just put my 2 strands together. This is when you're working with 2 strands. I'm sure you probably do this already, but just in case, just pull the 2 strands along and just make a kind of prepared thread. Oh, mine's just falling on the floor. Make a prepared thread of 2 strands of yarn, and then just either pop it in a bag next to you or find some way of keeping those 2 threads together so that it just makes it really easy to work rather than having to constantly pull from the 2 balls at once each time. So just make yourself a length thread as you go, and that will really help. Okay, now on to the pattern. To create a magic ring, lay the 2 threads over your hand, wind the yarn up and over the back of your front 2 fingers, lock in with your little finger, put the hook under the first 2 threads, pull through the second 2, twist it clockwise and chain 1. And there you have your magic ring. Now for row 1 for the ombre shawl, we chain 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4. This counts as your first treble, which is UK, or double crochet, which is US. For the rest of the video, I'm going to be working in UK terms. So this counts as a treble and a chain 1. Next, work 2 trebles into this ring, a chain 2, then another 2 trebles, then a chain 1 and a final treble into this ring. So you'll have chain 4, which is 1 treble, chain 1, 2 trebles, a chain 2, this is the center of your shawl, 2 trebles, a chain 1 and a final treble. Then we're going to pull the tail nice and tight. And there you have row 1 of your ombre shawl. It's cute, isn't it? Okay, now for row 2. For row 2, so for row 2, you want to chain 4, and we're going to work 2 trebles into this first chain 1 space. This is your first increase here. So you can see you've made 2 trebles into the first chain 1 space. Now we're going to treble in the lower front loop of each stitch to the center chain 2 space. So I'll show you what this is. Now if you were going to go into the stitch normally, as you know, you would be going under the front 2 loops, the top 2 loops of a stitch here. but that's not where we're going to work for this one. We're going to be working in the lower front loop here. That's where we're going to be working into, and you'll see the effect it has. It's lovely. So just yarn over as normal, and the trick with this is to kind of not push in directly, but kind of slip in sideways, and there's a little sweet spot just here that you slip into and work it sideways so you catch just those 2 threads of that yarn over, and then just finish the stitch as normal. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. I'll do that one more time for you. Yarn over, instead of going in through the top loops, we're going into this loop here, which is directly underneath the 2 loops at the top of the stitch. Kind of go in that little nook of a sweet spot, and you want to make sure you've got 2 threads on your loop, on your hook. Yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And what that does, it creates this knit-like stitch on the other side. So it looks really nice, and when the shawl is big, it will look super duper. In fact, I can quickly show you now how that looks. So it creates this effect here, which is a lovely effect. So continuing on with row 2, we're now at the center chain 2 space, and in the center chain 2 space you are always going to put 2 trebles, 1 and 2, a chain 2, both counter stitches, remember, and then 2 more trebles, all into the center chain 2 space. And now we're going to work 2 more trebles working in the lower front loop. That's what I've called it, the lower front loop. So yarn over, slip into that little sweet spot, grab those 2, and then just finish the stitch as normal. Oops, my yarn needs to be untangled. Here we go. Again, yarn over into that little loop, just there. Oops, it can be a bit tricky on when you're doing these first few rows, but once it grows it does become a lot easier. And now we're at the last 2 stitches. Remember, all chain stitches are counted as stitches. So in the last chain 1 space we're going to work 2 trebles, and a chain 1, and then in the top of the chain 4 we're going to work a treble in the 3rd chain. So if you're not sure where that is, just have a look behind you and you can see your chains, but you can pretty much guess that what you've just worked into is the 4th chain, so hopefully the 3rd chain will be sticking out. And the easiest way to do this, I find, is to go through this back bump here. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'd better yarn over first, hadn't I? And there we have it, the second row. So just to recap, just because this is the very beginning, we have a chain 4, counts as a treble chain 1, then we worked 2 trebles into the chain 1 space, then we worked 2 trebles into the lower front loop to give us this effect here. It doesn't look much now, but when it grows you'll see the effect. Then in the center we worked 2 trebles, chain 2 and 2 trebles, then 2 more trebles in the lower front loop, and then at the end in the last chain 1 space we worked 2 trebles and a chain 1, and then in the 3rd chain of the previous chain 4 from the previous round we worked 1 more treble, and that gives you your row 2. Hopefully going a little bit slowly at the beginning, will just help you get to grips with how this works. So now for row 3 and row 4, you're going to need to repeat row 2. So go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back at the end of row 4. Now for those of you who are a little bit unsure about changing colours and just want to have a little look at how we do that, I'm going to carry on working row 3. This is for you. If you're fine with changing colours, then feel free to skip ahead. So the way we do that is as follows. Now, relating to this pattern, the last stitch is where we change colours before the next row. So if your pattern, say we're working row 3, so row 2 is colours A and A, which in my case is orchard and orchard, and row 3 says colours A and B, which in my case is orchard and silver. So we're starting, so we need to take one colour away and put a new colour in. So how do we do that? Well, we do it on the last yarn over of the last stitch. So work your last stitch of row 2, but stop before the last yarn over. So I'm left with 2 loops on my hook. This is the perfect time to cut your yarn because we don't need one anymore. We just want one. So that one goes over there. In fact, I'm going to put that underneath my working yarn. So we have one thread left of orchard, colour A, and I'm going to bring in silver, which is this beautiful, beautiful silver colour here, and I'm going to work that colour in. So how I actually do that by holding it against my hook with my other finger. I grab my 2 threads for my new colour for row 3, and I yarn over with those and pull them through, and it's that simple. So finally for row 3, just one more thing I wanted to mention. If you struggle to work in the front lower loop, the lower front loop of the stitch, you can instead work in the back loop. And if you want to do that, all you do is simply, instead of working in this loop here, which is the lower front loop, you work into, I'll just move my tails out of the way actually, that's just confusing things. You work into the back loop, which is here. Okay, so you can just work that one instead. Whoops, I'm working on the camera screen. It's just as much a lovely effect as working the front loop, and it will still give you that bit of texture on the rows that you prefer to do that. I hope that's of help, and carry on working row 3 and 4, repeating row 2 for 3 and 4, and I'll meet you at the end of row 4, ready to do row 5. Okay, so now we're ready to work row 5, and I'm just going to tuck my tails ends over the top of my working yarn and just to the front of my work while I work my chain 4, and then I'm going to just work them in to the first 2 stitches. It just helps to lock them in place. But as we're working chain 1s on this row, it's no good trying to work them in with chain 1s because it just looks untidy and they'll slip out and it won't be any good. So you need to secure those in with a yarn needle. Okay, so row 5, again, it's chain 4, 2 trebles in the first chain 1 space, and there's your increases at the beginning. Then we treble in the next stitch, just a regular treble in the top 2 loops. Now we're going to do a repeating pattern. So the pattern says treble in the next stitch, chain 1, skip 1 to the center, chain 2 space. So those instructions in the square brackets you're going to repeat until you reach the center chain 2 space. So to begin, chain 1 and skip 1, then work the stitches in the brackets. Treble in the next stitch, chain 1, skip 1, in the next stitch, chain 1, skip 1, and so on to the center chain 2 space. And as it's just a short row, I won't stop the video, I'll keep going to the center chain 2 space, and we'll just work that together. So here we are, chain 1, skip 1 is the last instruction, and now we're at the center chain 2 space. Another little tip here for future rows, always a good idea to count your stitches row by row, but side by side, and that's what the little chart here is for. It's given you total row stitches plus total stitches each side, and remember, you are counting the chain 1 stitches. All chain stitches count as a stitch. They are a valid stitch and they have to be counted. So your total number of stitches on row 5 for the whole row is 42, and that includes all your chain spaces. So all your chain 1 stitches are stitches. So let's work that center chain 2 space with 2 trebles, chain 2. Oops, did I do chain 2? It's very hard working with a camera. 1 and 2, and then 2 trebles, and then complete the rest of the row, and then we'll work chain row 6. Meet you there. Okay, so here we are for row 6. And row 6 is chain 4. Remember, that counts as a treble and a chain 1. That's 2 stitches. 2 trebles in the first chain 1 space. Now we're going to treble in every stitch and chain 1 space all the way to the center chain 2 space. And that literally is exactly as it says, treble in every stitch. So every stitch needs to have a treble in it. And every chain needs to have a treble in it as well. So treble in the stitches and treble in the chain spaces, all the way to the center chain 2 space. Oops. Again, I'm sort of looking in the camera and looking down at my work, so I'm making a few slip-ups here and there, so sorry about that, but I'm kind of looking at the pattern, looking at the camera to make sure I'm in focus, and also looking at my hands in real time as well. It can get terribly confusing. I'm not good with videos, but I know how important they are, so I just hope you bear with me in my little glitches and my little errors, and every time I take a break, it's me looking at the pattern to make sure I'm in the right spot. So here we are at the center chain 2 space. So that's what row 6 means. Treble in every stitch and chain space to the center chain 2 space. That's all it means. It literally means exactly as it says. Now in the center again, it is the usual 2 trebles, chain 2, and if you're finding it's getting a little bit bunched up, just slip it over and work your next 2 trebles in that chain 2. Whoops, see, I did a whoops, look. Sometimes your thread, you just need to keep smoothing it out with 2. It can get a little loop if it gets a kink, and you end up with a loop in your stitch, and you don't want that. You want nice smooth stitches. So the center is treble 2, chain 2, treble 2. I think I've worded it better in my pattern. And then again on the second side, we're going to treble in every stitch. So these 2 here need a treble, and then we're going to treble in the chain spaces too, all the way to the other end. I try and follow an international standard when writing my patterns, and I know and I'm astonished that some of you can't read patterns, and that's okay, I get that. You know, a lot of us started out working with YouTube and But trouble with YouTube is you can get a lot of misinformation, and people do it very differently, and they make up their own ways of doing it, and I think that's where a lot of people get very confused. So I'm hoping to rectify that very soon with my videos on the portal. The membership portal is still being done. It's a massive task. I'm sure you appreciate that, but I really hope it'll be up really soon. And when it is, I want to feed it with lots and lots of useful tips and information for you. But here we are now at the end of row 6, and all we've done in row 6, as per the pattern, we've just trebled in every stitch and chain space all the way along, and for this part to the last 2 stitches. The last 2 stitches being our chain 4, which equals a treble and a chain. So now we work our little end stitches again, which are our increases. Oops. And that will be the end of Silver and Silver. Such a gorgeous colour, silver and silver. I want to do this whole shawl actually in just silver, but in one thread. I'm curious to see what that would look like. I might do that. I might just order some more and do a whole shawl in one colour, because I love this colour. I don't know why, it's just something beautiful about this silver. Anyway, I digress. So we're changing colours again, and now at this stage my balls are pretty much the same size because I've done 2 rows in them, but just keep a check on that when I made my first sample, I accidentally picked up the wrong ball to change colours, and I found that one was getting smaller than the other. So just watch that when you're changing colours. And my last colour, which is for row 7, is this lovely beige. We're working on the neutral colour here. So again, to change colours, just snip off one of your threads, and then we're going to attach, I can find the end of it, here it is, attach the new colour into the last yarn over of the last stitch, ready for row 7. Oops. Yes, I got that in camera. Woohoo! And there we are. So at the end of row 7, you're going to want to just get rid of that second ball of silver. Just tidy up your threads and get them prepped for your next row, and then we'll start row 7 together. So once we've done our chain 4 and 2 trebles in the chain 1 space, we then want to work a treble into the lower front loop of each stitch to the center chain 2 space. And I'm going to work in my tails on this one too, so I hope that doesn't confuse you. And hopefully by now you know how to work into the lower front loop of the stitch. So I work my tails out. I'm just going to move them out of the way because for the benefit of the video it can be a bit hard to see. So the lower front loop, you will get used to this. I'm doing it slowly so you can see. You will get used to it. I know it seems tricky at first, but honestly it's worth it because the effect is so pretty and it just gives your shawl a little bit of an extra edge. So carry on working that to the center chain 2 space, work your center chain 2 space stitches, and then that will be the end of row 7. So there we are, there's row 7 completed, and at the end of row 7 you should have 58 stitches all around, including the chain 1 space at the beginning and end, and including the chain 2 spaces. So chain 2 is 2 stitches, chain 1 is 1 stitch. Count those 2 count those in as well, and that will make 58 stitches, which is 29 stitches on each row, on each side. Your little handy chart here will give you those numbers, so it's really a good idea to check that off each time. Honestly, it will save you so much grief later. If you don't want to work the lower front loops, work in the back loops. Work in the back loops wherever you feel comfortable, or you know, work in the lower front loops if you're a bit more advanced and want to do that. So keep going with the 3 rows, which is row 5. Where are we here? So 5, 6 and 7. These are the repeating rows. So you need to continue now working those 3 rows, changing colours according to your guide. Change colours at the end of the correct row. And don't forget, you can download a chart of this from the preview page, which tells you the colours in AA, BB, BC, and so on and so on, instead of using the sample colour guide. So download that if you want to. And any questions, let me know. Keep going until you get to row 31, and I'll meet you at row 32. So for round 32, it's just a little bit different. So we start off exactly the same. We chain 4 and work 2 trebles into the chain 1 space. Except this time, instead of putting another treble here, we're going to chain 1, skip 1, work a treble into this stitch here, chain 1 and skip 1, and we're going to be working into the chain 1 spaces and skipping the stitches on row 32. So chain 1, skip the stitch and work the treble into the chain 1 space, and continue along to the center. And as if by magic, we're back in the center. So at the end of that row of this side, you need to finish at the last 2 trebles of the side. The next thing to do is to chain 1 and work 1 treble into that last treble on the side. Then you work your center stitches, so it's 2 trebles, chain 2 and 2 more trebles, then we're going to carry on down the second side. To do this, you just work a treble directly into the next stitch after the center. My shawl is getting heavy now, so it's dragging away from my desk. So treble in that first one of this side, then we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to work into the chain 1 spaces again all the way down side 2. So it's treble in the chain 1 space, chain 1, treble in the chain 1 space, chain 1, and so on, all the way to the very end. And you're going to work your last treble in the last chain 1 space. So at the end of row 32, you'll have 5 stitches left, which includes 3 trebles, 1 chain 1, and your first treble. To finish the last 5 stitches, chain 1, skip 1, work a treble in the next stitch, chain 1, skip 1 again, then work 2 trebles into the last chain 1 space, chain 1, and then your treble into the third chain of the initial chain 4 from the previous round. And here is where I'm going to be changing colours. So I'm using this beautiful orchid for my last round. So change to the last colour. Turn your work.